I thought hard work and loyalty were enough to climb the ladder at my job. But I was wrong, dead wrong. The man I trusted most, my so-called mentor, wasn't just plotting behind my back, he was using me as a pawn in his game. One moment, I was the rising star of the company. The next, I was humiliated, stripped of everything I'd built, and left with nothing but anger boiling inside me. They thought I'd stay broken. They thought I'd walk away quietly. But they forgot one thing about me. I don't forgive betrayal, and I never forget. What I did next turned the entire workplace upside down. From the moment I stepped into that office, I believed I had found my place in the world. The smell of fresh coffee, the click of keyboards, the low hum of conversations about deadlines and deals, it all felt like the rhythm of a life I was finally proud to call my own. I wasn't born into money. I wasn't handed opportunity on a silver platter. I worked night shifts at gas stations, took student loans I'm still paying off, and sacrificed sleep just to scrape by. But somehow, I landed a spot at one of the most respected firms in the city. To me, it wasn't just a job, it was validation. Proof that my sacrifices hadn't been for nothing. At 24, I was the youngest analyst in my department. I showed up before sunrise, stayed long after dark, and poured myself into every task like my future depended on it, because it did. My father always said, "Son, in this country, nobody's gonna hand you a damn thing. You earn it, or you get left behind." Those words echoed in my head every time I opened a spreadsheet, every time I polished a presentation until it gleamed. I wasn't the smartest guy in the room, but I sure as hell was the hardest worker. And for a while, it seemed like people noticed. There was one man in particular whose opinion meant everything to me, Daniel Carter. He was my direct supervisor, my mentor, and in my eyes, the very definition of success. Mid-40s, sharp suits, confident smile. The kind of guy who could walk into a boardroom and have everyone hanging on his every word. When he first shook my hand on my first day, he said, "Welcome aboard, kid. Stick close to me, and you'll go far." Those words lit a fire inside me. I wanted to be like him someday, to earn respect, to lead, to prove myself. And at first, it felt like he believed in me. He gave me challenging projects, pushed me to take risks, and praised me in front of the team. "You've got potential," he'd say with a grin. "Don't waste it." Every time he said that, I worked even harder, convinced that my loyalty and dedication would be rewarded. But the truth? The truth was hiding in the cracks I didn't notice at first. The quick glances between him and upper management when I spoke up in meetings. The way he'd take credit for ideas I floated in private conversations. The subtle digs, disguised as jokes, about me being the eager kid still wet behind the ears. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, Daniel was the one who'd given me a shot. He couldn't be the enemy, could he? The office itself was a battlefield dressed up in business casual. Smiles in the hallways, handshakes at the coffee machine, but beneath it all, everyone was hungry, desperate to climb the ladder, even if it meant stepping on the person below them. I noticed how people gossiped about promotions, how coworkers who once laughed together turned cold the moment competition got fierce. But me? I stayed out of it. I kept my head down, stayed focused on the work, and believed, naively, that good things came to those who earned them. I didn't realize I was painting a target on my own back. The first crack in the illusion came during a quarterly review. I had spent weeks building a financial model that saved the company millions. I stayed late every night, double-checking numbers, making sure it was airtight. On the day of the presentation, Daniel walked into the boardroom with my work under his arm. He spoke with charm, confidence, and precision, but not once did he mention my name. The applause, the handshakes, the promises of bonuses, they were all his. I sat in the back, smiling faintly, telling myself it didn't matter who got the credit, as long as the team succeeded. But deep down it hurt. Later, when I asked him about it, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Relax, kid. You're part of my team. My wins are your wins." I forced a smile, but something inside me tightened. Was it really a win if nobody knew I was the one who'd earned it? Still, I stayed loyal. I told myself patience was key, that one day he'd recognize me publicly, that one day my chance would come. That's the thing about betrayal. You never see it coming when you're blinded by hope. Months turned into a year, and I became Daniel's right-hand man. He trusted me with everything: client accounts, confidential reports, even late-night strategy sessions over whiskey in his office. Sometimes, he'd vent about upper management, calling them sharks in suits. Sometimes, he'd flatter me, saying I was the only one he could rely on. I drank in his words like water in a desert, never suspecting that I was being set up. The pressure kept building. More hours, more responsibility, more sacrifices. Friends drifted away, relationships collapsed, and I stopped calling home as often. My entire world became that office, that man, that promise of someday. And the more I gave, the more he took. I remember one night in particular. The office was nearly empty, just the two of us hunched over a deal worth millions. My eyes burned from staring at numbers all day, and I joked that I felt like a zombie. Daniel chuckled, poured me another glass of whiskey, and said, "Kid, you're gonna thank me one day. All this pain you're going through, it's building you. You'll see." I laughed weakly, not realizing the double meaning behind his words. Because while I thought he was building me up, he was quietly tearing me down. It started with whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. A senior manager asked Daniel about me in the hallway one afternoon. I caught just a piece of his answer. "He's eager, but green. Needs a lot of hand-holding." My stomach dropped. Hand-holding? I was doing the bulk of his work. I brushed it off as a misunderstanding, but a seed of doubt was planted. Then came the missed opportunities. A leadership training program I applied for mysteriously closed early. A presentation I was supposed to lead got reassigned to Daniel at the last minute. When I asked why, he just smiled and said, "Timing, kid. Your moment will come." But each time, my moment slipped further away. Meanwhile, the office politics sharpened their claws. Co-workers who once chatted with me over coffee now looked at me with suspicion, as if I'd been climbing too fast, too soon. I didn't realize Daniel was feeding that narrative, painting me as overambitious, reckless, someone who needed guidance. Behind closed doors, he was making me look like a liability, while to my face, he acted like a mentor. It was a slow erosion. 1,000 tiny cuts I didn't feel until the blood was already pooling. And yet, I clung to hope. Because that's what betrayal does. It lulls you into believing the storm overhead is just passing clouds, when really, it's the calm before the hurricane. By the time the real blow landed, I was too deep to escape. The downfall didn't hit me all at once. It crept in quietly, like a shadow crawling across the floor, until one day I looked around and realized I was standing in the dark. Daniel's first real strike came during a major client pitch. I had worked for weeks, sleepless nights, endless revisions, rehearsing every line until it felt like the words were carved into my bones. I was supposed to deliver the presentation. Daniel assured me it was my chance to prove myself in front of upper management. I showed up early that morning, suit pressed, tie straight, palms sweating with both nerves and excitement. But when the meeting started, something shifted. Daniel opened the presentation with my slides, my research, my words, but my name was nowhere on the material. Not one mention. When I cleared my throat to speak, he held up a hand, almost dismissively, and said, "Let me handle this one, kid. You'll get your turn." The room laughed at his charm. but I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I sat there, silent, while Daniel dazzled them with my work. When the applause filled the room, it wasn't for me. It was for him. Again. I should have said something then. But instead, I told myself patience was key, that my loyalty would eventually be recognized. That's what Daniel wanted me to believe. It only got worse from there. He began planting subtle doubts about me in other people's minds. A spreadsheet error I had corrected was suddenly blamed on me. A late email reply, caused by my overloaded schedule, was spun as me being unreliable. Every mistake in the department, no matter how small, somehow had my name attached. Meanwhile, every success Daniel touched was amplified, polished, broadcasted. I didn't see it at first, but I was being buried. Slowly, carefully, he was building a case against me while using me as the engine for his success. And the more I tried to fight back, the deeper I sank. The office chatter turned sharper. I'd walk into the break room and conversations would stop. People who once asked for my help now looked at me like I was radioactive. I started eating lunch at my desk, headphones in, pretending not to notice the way eyes followed me. And then came the review. Annual performance reviews were supposed to be straightforward. Numbers, results, feedback. I walked into Daniel's office confident. Despite everything, my output was undeniable. I'd closed deals, streamlined processes, saved the company money. Whatever people thought of me, the results spoke for themselves. Or so I believed. Daniel sat behind his desk, flipping through my file with exaggerated slowness. "Kid," he said, shaking his head, "I'm disappointed." My chest tightened. "Disappointed? Sir, with all due respect, He cut me off with a raised hand. "You work hard, sure. But hard work isn't enough. You're sloppy. Reckless. You take risks that put the whole team in jeopardy. You've got potential, but potential isn't results. Results are what I deliver. You're still learning." His words sliced deeper than I expected. I wanted to argue, to show him the numbers, the emails, the hours logged. But something in his tone told me it was useless. This wasn't about facts. It was about narrative. And Daniel had already written mine. That night, I walked home through the city streets with the weight of the world on my shoulders. Neon lights blurred through tears I refused to let fall. For the first time since I started that job, doubt crept in. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't enough. But a small voice inside me whispered something else. Or maybe you're being played. That voice grew louder with each passing week. Because the betrayals didn't stop, they escalated. Daniel began copying me on fewer emails, leaving me out of key meetings, shutting me out of projects I'd once led. He still called me "kid" with that same smirk, but now it felt like mockery. A reminder that no matter how hard I worked, I'd always be beneath him. And then came the humiliation. One Friday afternoon, in front of the entire team, Daniel called me out for dropping the ball on a client report. The report was flawless, because I had stayed up until 3 a.m. perfecting it. But he waved the papers in the air, highlighting imaginary mistakes, tearing me down in front of everyone. I stood there, face burning, fists clenched at my sides, while laughter rippled through the room. "Learn from your mistakes, kid," Daniel said, his voice dripping with false kindness. "That's how you grow." I went home that night shattered. But something inside me shifted. Pain turned into anger. Anger turned into resolve. And resolve, well, that was the seed of something darker. Because if Daniel wanted to play games, he was about to learn something about me. I don't quit. And I don't forgive betrayal. From that point on, I started watching, listening, noticing things I had overlooked before. The way Daniel kept 2 sets of books, one polished for clients, one messy and hidden. The phone calls he took behind closed doors, his voice low, urgent. The way he suddenly had expensive new watches, new suits, a new car, despite his salary being public knowledge. He wasn't just ambitious. He was crooked. And the more I saw, the clearer it became. Daniel wasn't just sabotaging me to protect his position. He was using me as a shield while he lined his own pockets. If anything went wrong, the eager kid would take the fall. For the first time, the thought of revenge didn't just cross my mind, it took root. I began documenting everything. Every irregularity, every shady transaction, every time he used my work to cover his tracks. Quietly, carefully, I built a file. I stopped seeing myself as the victim and started seeing myself as the weapon. But Daniel wasn't stupid. He sensed the shift. And when he did, he struck harder than ever before. The promotion list came out. I wasn't just passed over, I was demoted. Officially labeled as underperforming. My salary was slashed, my responsibilities cut in half, and I was reassigned to menial tasks that felt like an insult. That was the breaking point. Because sitting at my desk, stapling reports while Daniel strutted past with his new Rolex glinting under the fluorescent lights, I realized something. He thought he had destroyed me. He thought he'd stripped me of everything that mattered. But what he didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that I had already started building his downfall. And when it came, it wouldn't just ruin his career. It would destroy his life. The breaking point didn't shatter me. It sharpened me. When Daniel demoted me, he thought he'd clipped my wings forever. He believed stripping me of my title and shoving me into a corner would humiliate me into silence. What he didn't realize was that he had just freed me from chasing his approval. I stopped wasting energy trying to please him and started preparing his destruction. The file I'd been building in secret became more than just a record. It became my lifeline. Every shady deal, every manipulated report, every whispered phone call, every lie he told, it was all there. Neat. Organized. Undeniable. But raw evidence wasn't enough. If I marched into upper management waving documents, Daniel would spin it like he always did. He'd call me a bitter kid, say I misunderstood. If I went to HR, it would vanish into bureaucracy. If I went to the authorities too soon, it would turn into a messy, years-long war with no guarantee I'd win. No. I needed a stage. I needed a spotlight. I needed him exposed in front of the very people who worshipped him. And then fate handed me the perfect opportunity. The company's annual shareholders meeting. The one event where every executive, investor, and major client gathered in the same room. The biggest stage of the year. And Daniel Carter had been selected to give the keynote address. He had bragged about it for weeks, calling it his crowning moment, his coronation, the speech that would secure his legacy. That would be the day his empire collapsed. The weeks leading up to the meeting, I played my role perfectly. I acted defeated, broken, like his demotion had crushed the fight out of me. I carried his papers, fetched his coffee, nodded like a good little soldier when he mocked me in front of others. He called me kid in that condescending tone, and I swallowed my pride, even smiled. He thought he'd won. He thought I'd accepted my place under his boot. But while I served him in the daylight, I worked in the shadows at night. I cross-referenced accounts, saved incriminating emails to hidden drives, traced transactions he thought no one would ever notice. The deeper I dug, the uglier it became. Offshore accounts in the Caymans. Kickbacks from clients disguised as consulting fees. Fake invoices that funneled money into shell companies. He wasn't just ambitious, he was rotten to the core. A parasite wearing a tailored suit. And the higher he climbed, the harder his fall would be. The night before the meeting, I didn't sleep. Not even a minute. My apartment floor was covered with printouts, USB drives, sticky notes, scrawled with half-legible handwriting. It looked like a detective's war room, every thread connecting to Daniel Carter. I checked and rechecked every file. My hand shook, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I remember pacing the room, whispering to myself, "This is it. Tomorrow isn't just another day. Tomorrow is the day everything changes." At 3 a.m., I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably asleep in his million-dollar mansion, dreaming of applause and admiration. He had no idea that his nightmare was just hours away. I smiled to myself for the first time in months. Not a nervous smile. Not a polite one. A real smile. When morning came, I dressed in my best suit. The one I'd been saving for a moment that mattered. Not flashy, not expensive, but sharp. Clean lines, pressed fabric, polished shoes. A soldier's armor. Walking into the Grand Hotel ballroom, I blended into the crowd. Nobody looked twice at me. To them, I was still just another junior employee. Forgettable. Invisible. That invisibility was my greatest weapon. The room buzzed with energy. Chandeliers glittered overhead, golden light spilling across polished floors. Waiters wove through the crowd with trays of champagne. Executives mingled, their voices a low hum of money and power. Clients laughed, investors whispered in corners. At the front, a massive stage waited, screens glowing with the company's logo. Soon, Daniel would step onto that stage, ready to bask in the spotlight he thought he deserved. I slipped into a seat near the back. My laptop rested on my knees, hidden beneath the tablecloth. My heart thudded like a war drum in my chest. Every tick of the clock felt like thunder. Finally, the lights dimmed. The crowd hushed, and Daniel Carter walked out. He looked every bit the part of a golden executive. Confident stride, designer suit, that polished smile he wore like armor. The room erupted in applause, and he soaked it in like a king greeting his loyal subjects. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "today we celebrate another year of growth, innovation, and success." The crowd nodded, clapped, leaned forward. They hung on every word. But I barely heard him. My focus was on my laptop, on the USB drive in my pocket, on the plan I had rehearsed 1,000 times. My palms were slick with sweat, but my hands moved with steady precision. I connected to the ballroom's projection system, the very same one Daniel's presentation was running through. Weeks of preparation boiled down to this. One wrong move, and it would all collapse. As Daniel clicked through his slides, charts, graphs, bullet points of corporate jargon, I waited. He was in his element, commanding the room, grinning as though the world belonged to him. But he didn't know his kingdom was already burning. Then, at the exact moment Daniel clicked to reveal his record-breaking revenue slide, the screen glitched. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel frowned, tapping the remote. The slide flickered, once, twice, and then changed. Not to his polished numbers, but to mine. Emails. Bank transfers. Invoices. Line after line of damning evidence, projected 30 feet high for everyone to see. The room fell silent. "What the hell?" Daniel stammered, his voice cracking. He jabbed the remote, flipping to the next slide. More evidence. Offshore accounts. Wire transfers. Fake consulting fees. He clicked again. Screenshots of emails where he mocked me, where he instructed me to cover his mistakes. The whispers began. Low at first. Then louder. "Is this real? Oh my God! Those are Cayman accounts! He's been stealing." Daniel's mask slipped. His confident smile faltered, twisting into panic. This is a mistake. Someone hacked the system." His voice rose, frantic. "None of this is real." But it was too late. The evidence was undeniable. Phones came out, cameras clicked, videos rolled. Investors snapped photos of every slide. Executives muttered curses under their breath. Clients pulled away in disgust. Daniel's empire was crumbling in real time, and everyone was watching. I stood slowly from my seat. My legs felt steady, my chest tight with adrenaline. For the first time, all eyes turned toward me. "It's real," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. Calm, steady, deadly. "Every number, every document. I know, because I was the one he used to cover it all up." The room froze. Dozens of heads swiveled. Cameras pointed at me now. Daniel's face drained of color. "You little—" he spat, his voice shaking with fury. He started toward me, but security moved faster, stepping between us. Executives barked orders. Investors demanded answers. A woman near the front shouted, "We trusted you, Daniel." Someone else yelled, "You're finished." Daniel flailed, pointing at me. "He's lying. He's jealous. This is some kind of setup." His voice cracked under the weight of his own desperation. I locked eyes with him. For once, I wasn't the kid he humiliated. I wasn't the pawn in his game. "You taught me a lot, Daniel," I said, my words deliberate, sharp enough to cut. "But the biggest lesson? Never betray someone who has nothing left to lose." His face contorted. Rage, fear, disbelief all battling across his features. And then security grabbed him. The crowd jeered, booed. Some laughed outright as the great Daniel Carter was dragged from the stage like a criminal. The man who once strutted through the office untouchable was now a spectacle. A fraud. A joke. And in that moment, I felt it. The sweet, intoxicating satisfaction of revenge. But even as the room erupted in chaos, executives scrambling, investors shouting, reporters dialing their editors, I knew this wasn't the end. Exposing him publicly wasn't the conclusion. It was only the spark. And the fire was still coming. The ballroom chaos still echoed in my head long after Daniel was dragged out. Phones buzzed, executives scrambled, clients stormed out, and the perfect little empire he'd built was collapsing like a house of cards. For years, Daniel Carter had strutted through the office with untouchable confidence, but in less than 10 minutes, he'd been stripped bare in front of everyone who once praised him. I didn't stick around to watch the fallout that night. I didn't need to. By the time I stepped out into the cool night air, I knew the fire I'd lit inside that room would burn for months, maybe years. And I was right. The first ripple hit the very next morning. News outlets ran headlines splashed with his name. "Corporate Golden Boy exposed in massive fraud scandal." Local papers printed his mugshot beside the company's logo. National news anchors dissected his fall from grace like it was blood in the water. Social media tore him apart. Every photo of him shaking hands with executives, every polished interview he'd given, was suddenly paired with captions calling him a liar, a thief, a parasite. The internet has a way of destroying people faster than any courtroom ever could. But the courtroom came too. Federal investigators raided his office within days, carting out boxes of files I had already combed through. I'd already handed them the trail. They just had to follow it. His accounts were frozen, his expensive cars seized, his mansion put up for foreclosure. The Rolex that used to glint under office lights now sat in an evidence bag. His friends, in upper management, those who once toasted him with champagne, cut ties immediately, painting themselves as victims of his schemes. They weren't victims. They were enablers. But with Daniel sinking fast, they were eager to throw him overboard and save their own skins. He was left standing alone, stripped of allies, drowning in the empire he built on lies. The trial that followed was brutal. Cameras lined the courthouse steps, reporters shouted questions, protesters held signs. Some were victims of the financial fallout, people whose savings had been eaten alive by schemes Daniel orchestrated. Others were just there to witness the downfall of a man they once admired. I didn't attend every hearing, but the ones I did, they were surreal. To see him in an orange jumpsuit instead of a tailored suit, shackled instead of swaggering, it was like watching a king be paraded through the streets in disgrace. The man who once mocked me, who once smirked while cutting me down in front of the team, now begged the judge for mercy. He cried. He pleaded. He even tried to paint himself as the misunderstood one, as if everyone else was to blame. But there was no mercy. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of fraud, embezzlement, manipulation, laid bare for the world. Witness after witness testified. Documents flashed on screens. Recordings were played. I'd given the investigators everything, and they made sure every piece hit like a hammer. When the sentence came, over a decade in federal prison, you could feel the air leave the courtroom. Some gasped. Some smiled. I just sat there, still. When the gavel struck, I felt a wave of finality wash over me. It was done. But revenge isn't just about courtrooms and headlines. It's about impact. About the long shadow betrayal casts, and the light revenge brings. Back at the office, the shift was immediate. People who once looked at me with suspicion now avoided my gaze entirely, ashamed of the way they had joined in Daniel's games. A few apologized, stumbling over words about how they didn't know, or didn't mean to. Most just stayed quiet, keeping their heads down. Upper management tried to sweep it all under the rug at first, but Daniel's downfall was too big to bury. Investors demanded change, clients threatened to leave, and suddenly the company was desperate for new leadership. And that's when, to my surprise, they turned to me. I didn't become CEO overnight, but I was promoted, publicly acknowledged for the work I had done. The projects Daniel stole credit for were reassigned under my name. My salary doubled, and for the first time in years, I walked into the office without that crushing weight on my shoulders. Still, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the title. It was about the look on people's faces when they realized I wasn't the naive kid anymore. I was the one who had stood up, who had refused to stay broken. But revenge, as sweet as it was, didn't erase the scars. There were nights I'd lie awake, replaying the humiliation, the whispers, the laughter when Daniel mocked me in front of everyone. Even with him rotting behind bars, those memories lingered like old wounds. Sometimes I'd dream I was back in that office, being laughed at again, only to wake up drenched in sweat. And a part of me wondered, had I really won? Or had I just traded one kind of pain for another? The answer came slowly, in small moments. The first time my father called and said, "I'm proud of you, son." The first time a coworker asked me for advice, genuinely, without condescension. The first time I walked past Daniel's empty office and realized I wasn't afraid of shadows anymore. Revenge hadn't just destroyed Daniel. It had rebuilt me. Months later, I saw an article buried deep online. A photo of Daniel in prison, thinner, older, his once perfect hair now streaked with gray. The caption said he'd been denied parole, his appeals rejected. He looked nothing like the man who once towered over me. He looked small, and I felt nothing. No pity, no lingering rage. Just nothing. Because by then, I had already moved on. But the world hadn't. Stories kept surfacing. He got into fights in prison. His wife divorced him. His children refused to visit. The empire he once flaunted had crumbled into dust, leaving him a hollow shell of a man. Every action, every choice, every betrayal, it had all led him there. The office felt different. Not lighter, not happier, but freer. People whispered less, smiled more, and slowly, the toxic culture Daniel thrived on began to die. I wasn't naive enough to think it would vanish completely, Corporate life always has its sharks. But I knew one thing for certain. Nobody would ever treat me the way he did again. Because I wasn't the same boy who walked into that office years ago. I was someone forged by betrayal, hardened by humiliation, and sharpened by revenge. And when I looked in the mirror now, I didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor. But here's the thing about revenge. It doesn't give back what was taken. It doesn't erase the nights of doubt, the friendships lost, the years spent under someone else's shadow. What it gives is closure. A door slammed shut. A wound that stops bleeding. And maybe that's enough. So I'll ask you this. If someone betrayed you the way Daniel betrayed me, would you forgive them? Or would you burn their empire to the ground the way I did?